Reading from Psalms 40, just the first 3 verses today. Short reading. Oh, but I gotta hurry because it's already after 10 o'clock. No, I'm just kidding. But I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. He put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see and fear the Lord and put their trust in him. Now everyone loves the word new, don't we? Sometimes new isn't always better, but a new year, a new job, or as I remember in my old days of when I was a kid, those days when I was homesick from school, and I got to watch The Price is Right, because that was always on during the school day, and Bob Barker would stay on his, he'd have his little microphone, and I heard they used to have like 2 or 3 people that would just manage Bob Barker's microphone cord, as he walked around. That was one of the things you don't even realize. But yes, he had that really long cord, and you had to make sure nobody tripped on it or didn't get tangled up in something or a camera or anything. But now I guess they use a wireless mic. But anyway, it's Bob Barker would point to a little spot in the stage, and he would say, "What do we have for Rod?" And Roddy would say, "A new car!" And everybody would go, "Ah!" Whatever. But and we all love the word new. A new year, a new job, a new relationship, a new beginning. But in God's timing, new often does not arrive in the way we expect. The path to a new season often runs through the waiting room and sometimes the pit before it opens into praise. Now, we've talked a little bit about that actually in the last several weeks, but see, David wrote Psalm 40 after coming out of a deep and painful place. His words show us how God can transform desperation into destiny. He starts out, "I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry." We might think that sometimes waiting is a waste. Waiting is just time that we're stuck between one spot and another spot. Maybe we're sitting in a waiting room in a doctor's office and we're thinking, "Okay, come on, get me in there. I got stuff to do. I want to get in. I want to get out of here. I want to get moved on." But and then, or maybe we're waiting in line at the checkout, and waiting for that person, and that person's just taking forever. They're counting out pennies, or maybe the checker we feel like is engaging in a little too much conversation and not enough get moving and scanning and putting things in bags. This is why so many people like self-checkouts, I think, is because they just feel like they don't want to wait anymore. And then I guess some people hate self-checkouts, so it's always a mixture of things. Or maybe we're sitting there and we're waiting for the light to turn green, and we're like, "Come on, light, why are you still red? Everybody else gets to go." And then the light turns green, and somebody doesn't move quite as fast as we think they should, so we're like, "Come on, honk, honk, get going, people, let's go." And then maybe you've had that experience where you're just about ready to go through the light, and then it switches yellow and red, and you're like, "Oh, I don't know." But when we get impatient, our new that we end up with might not be the right new that we're supposed to get. See, impatience can push us into relationships. It can push us into decisions or habits that look new but aren't the right thing for us. Maybe you needed a new car, but you weren't patient. You didn't do your due diligence, and then you bought the wrong new car. Maybe you bought the wrong new house. Maybe you're Maybe you've got a new friendship or a new relationship that isn't right for you. Maybe you've bought something. Maybe you've made a decision. Maybe you've made that step into what you think is going to be a bright future, and it turns out that wasn't what was planned or purposed for you. See, there was someone in the Bible that waited for a very long time for a fulfillment of God's promise. And his name was Abram, and his wife's name was Sarai. As they became later known, Abraham and Sarah. God had promised Abraham a number of descendants, so many in fact that it would be like trying to count the stars in the sky or the grains of sand on the beach. But Abraham was already very old when God made that promise, and many years passed still, and he still had no son. He had no heir. He had, as far as we know, he didn't even have any daughters, that we know of. I mean, the Bible doesn't always tell us, about daughters. We know about the 12 sons of Jacob. Actually, there was 13 when you include Joseph, but we don't know about all the daughters that he may or may not have had. But so Sarah says, all right, we got to move this thing along. So he says, why don't you just, go to bed with my servant here. So Abraham does that, and then a child is born, and, well, we all know how that story went. Eventually, Sarah did have her own child, and that other child and that mother got banished, and, well, didn't turn out well. Sometimes when we get impatient, we try to move things along under our own timing, we end up making things worse. You see, patience allows the right new to unfold in God's time. See, waiting builds depth, not delay. Every prayer David whispers in the dark was heard by God. See, sometimes we feel like God is far away, but he's always near. And the word in Psalm 34, it says, the righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all of their troubles. See, when you cry out to God, he does not ignore you. Waiting does not mean he's absent. It means he's preparing something better than what impatience could ever produce. See, God gave Abraham a son named Isaac. And through him, he fulfilled the promise. God never intended for Abraham to sleep with Sarah's servant. That was not the promise that God had intended. He still took care of that mother and that boy. But it led to conflict between the two sons of Abraham that still exists today. That was a result of Abraham's impatience and Sarah's impatience. See, God uses this time of waiting to prepare something good for us. Think of a seed. Many of you are farmers, so it's not a hard thing to imagine for you guys. Think of a seed underground. It's unseen, but it starts growing roots. You see, your waiting season is like that seed. The seed opens. The seed starts to grow roots itself into the ground, and eventually, after time, it comes up. It breaks the soil. See, we need to stop asking sometimes. We ask, well, how long is this going to be? We need to stop asking how long and start saying however long it takes. We cannot confuse God's silence with God's absence. So David waited, and in the pit David also trusted. It says, he lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on the rock and gave me a firm place to stand. You see, the pit, well, it is a place where he was stuck, a place of imprisonment, and represents moments when we feel trapped in life and it can be many things. I mean, yes, we can be physically trapped, but we can also be trapped by fear. I know a lot of friends who are trapped by their own fears and anxieties, and they just let those things hem them in, and they just feel stuck. We might be feel trapped by sins. We may be feeling trapped by regret. We can even be trapped by grief or guilt. See, some pits are dug by our own mistakes. We dig ourselves into our own pits. We make decision after decision that just gets us into a hole. Others are dug by life itself. Sometimes something happens to us where we are just completely out of control, completely unprepared despite being prepared for what we feel like we're prepared, and then something hits us out of the blue that we don't even see coming, and we fall into a pit. Either way, it's dark, cold, and lonely. But we are not alone in that pit. You see, because the pit is also where Jesus went for us. In Philippians chapter 2, it says he made himself nothing. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. And Jesus, it says here, descended into the deepest pit, death itself, so that he could lift you out of yours. And as the psalmist continues in verse 2 of Psalm 40, it says, he established my steps. When God pulls you out, he doesn't just wipe off the mud, he gives you stability. Your pit becomes a story, a platform to testify. See, stories are a wonderful thing. They can just grab our imaginations. They can grab our attention. They can communicate truths. I had to teach a music class the other day, on Friday, because as I mentioned, the teacher was gone, and we were running a shortened schedule for that day. It was like running a 1 o'clock early dismissal schedule because we had this assembly and these parties and this Halloween parade and all of that. So I was having back-to-back classes, all morning long, starting at 8:15 all the way through 10:45, and then I had to go do a lunch duty and all of that. So I really didn't have much time to rest, but not only was I having back-to-back classes, they were all shorter than they were supposed to be, so I was having to kind of improvise my way through her subplans. And so eventually at the end, when I only had a few minutes left, I just kind of stopped wherever we were and said, all right, I'm going to tell you a story. Because I had a few minutes left, I didn't have time to start something new, but I had to figure out something to keep them occupied for about 4 minutes sometimes. So some of the stories I told, it was a little different depending on their age group. I told 3 classes a story of how I thought I had swallowed some gum when Mark and I were carrying a refrigerator down, Mark Jenkins and I were carrying a refrigerator down some steps over at Heartland, and he had lost his grip on the fridge, and some gum I was chewing on and went all the way back to the back of my throat, and I was choking, so I swallowed it. And as it turns out, I hadn't swallowed that gum as much as I thought. Later, after mowing the lawn and getting my allergies all revved up, I was sneezing and coughing, and eyes were running and blowing my nose, and my gum came out of my nose, actually. That was it's the strangest thing. It just, as I was blowing my nose, my gum just shot out of my right nostril, which kind of gross, but strange story. Kids love that story. And then I told a different story about how I had a mouse in my apartment, and the other, when I lived in Waterloo, and how I had to take care of the mouse, and how I managed to hit the mouse across the room with one of those little foam darts from a Nerf gun and stun it enough so I could grab it with a coffee can, and I left out the part where I drowned the mouse, but yeah, so they love that story too. It's full of action and adventure, but stories, you see, your pit becomes your story. There's so many times and so many stories I could share about how God brought me out of pits, how he brought me out of despair, how he brought me out of bad situations. And sometimes we don't even think about it when it happens. It just happens and we're like, oh, I'm glad that's over. And then later on we realize, wow, God did that. He's amazing. Our pit becomes our platform to testify. See, Joseph's pit, speaking of Jacob's sons, Joseph's pit eventually led to Pharaoh's palace. The well he was thrown down to led to being sold to slavery. His slavery ended up led to being the manager of a house. His imprisonment led him to being the number 2 person in Egypt. And through that, he saved his family and people. Jesus' tomb itself became an empty testimony. And when I say empty, I don't mean devoid of meaning or devoid of purpose. I mean the fact that it is empty speaks volumes to the fact that Jesus indeed is alive. Our pit is not the end. It's often a turning point. So as we look back at our own lives, what pits have we been in? Maybe we're in one right now. Maybe you're like poor Darrell and you're thinking, it's getting cold. I want to go down south, but darn it, I have this surgery planned and I can't leave as early as I would like. Sorry to pick on you, my friend. But so he may not be in a pit right now, but he's going to be in a freezer here pretty soon, probably. We all find ourselves in pits, places that we don't want to be, places where we feel trapped. Where have you been? And if you're in one now, can you trust that God's hand is beneath the surface ready to lift you out? Can you do that? Can you make that leap of trust today? Well, David managed himself when he did get lifted out of the pit. He says, in the new David magnified God with praise. He said, he put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. See, many will see and fear the Lord and put their trust in him. See, that's what I was talking about. Your pit becomes your testimony. I love hearing people's stories about how they talk about how God took them from where they are and brought them to where they are now. In a couple of weeks over at Heartland, I get to baptize 3 kids. Pastor Chad's going to be out of town. I think he's going to a Bears-Vikings game, if I remember right. His son bought tickets, so he won't be there that Sunday. And yeah, I love the stories of these kids, and I I can't wait for that moment to where we get in front of everybody and they get to tell their stories and we get to just declare publicly that I am going to follow Jesus for the rest of my life. I believe in him, and it is my intention to follow him for the rest of my life, and it's going to be a really good day. I'm so looking forward to that moment. Can't wait. 2 weeks away. And I say I can't wait, but I gotta wait because we've been talking about waiting, right? So God is just preparing for that day even right now. We're putting the plans together. We're planning out the service. It's going to be a really good day. So God puts a new song of praise in David's mouth. See, he doesn't just bring us out. He gives us a realization. He gives us a song of praise. And we talk about what is our song. That was something I talked about this week with our worship leader, our worship team. We got together on Thursday night over at the other church again, and we were talking about what is your song. We always sing songs. We sing songs about our own, we sing other people's songs. Like, we sang all these hymns today. They're wonderful hymns. Don't get me wrong. I love I Will Call Upon the Lord. It's one of my favorite songs from the old camp days. I even was singing the little round part, doing the echo part. And I love that Solid Rock song. Wonderful hymn. And we've got some more coming up. We've got Love Lifted Me and Be Strong in the Lord. More wonderful hymns. And surely the Presence is a wonderful hymn as well. But what is your song? If you wrote a song, what would be in it? Think about that for a moment. If you were David, or if you were living in the time of David and the Psalms were being written, or not all of these were written by David actually. There's a number of different authors that contributed, but David wrote quite a few of them. If you were writing a psalm, what would your psalm be? What would your song be? I stumbled on this thing. I wonder if I took a picture of it, actually. It just popped in my head again. I don't see it, unfortunately. I wish I had done that. But I stumbled on this old thing the other day in an old spiral notebook. And I didn't even know it was in there. I had grabbed it and I had started using it at school, when I needed scratch paper and such. And I'm surprised I don't have that picture because I know I meant to send it to somebody, but I don't remember exactly what I wrote, but it was kind of like a poem. I was told to write something out at the beginning of a journey. It was my journey into seminary. They said, I want you to write out a poem, a song, a prayer to God. And as I read that the other day, and I wish I did have it handy with me to share now that I think about it, because it was so amazing. I remember saying things like, God, as I start this new journey, I admitted I was a little fearful because college was something I had struggled with in the past, and I had just made it through and gotten my bachelor's degree, but this was a master's degree, and this was a whole new thing I was going for. I said, God, may I grow during this season. May I dig into the the Word, and may it be more than just an academic study, but may you build in me a hunger and thirst for your Word and your truth. May this be a moment, a time of explosive spiritual growth for me, and may I come out of it even closer to you than I ever thought possible. That's the gist of it. I wish I could read it word for word for you. And I stumbled on that again the other day as I was going through a little difficult morning myself, and I just happened to flip to the first page of that spiral notebook I was carrying around, and I found that, and I thought, oh my goodness. Wow. I wrote that, and I never even thought about it again until I saw it again, and I thought, man, God really did do some crazy things during my seminary time. And He has continued to be faithful so many more times. You know, that is why not often enough, but encourage you occasionally to write your prayers down in a journal, so that at some point later you can go back and look and you can see all of the things that God has done in your life. And it becomes another blessing to you. I mean, even in that moment to where I was having a difficult morning, reading that was enough to lift me out of that funk I was in. It reminded me how God had been with me during that time and how He is still with me even today. God doesn't just bring us out. He gives us that song, that praise, the truth, that transformation indeed happened. Your worship tells the world God still delivers. See, in putting our focus, magnifying God also changes our perspective. When we magnify God, we don't just make Him bigger. He's already infinite. We simply see Him more clearly. Now, sometimes we need that magnifying glass to read that little tiny print that we can't really make out anymore because our eyes aren't what they were used to be, or maybe the size they print things in isn't what it used to be. I don't know which one is true. But oftentimes we find ourselves needing a magnifying glass. Sometimes I have to take a picture of something on my phone so I can zoom in with it just to be able to read it. But a magnifying glass doesn't really make the image bigger, does it? It just enlarges and focuses our view. When you magnify God in your life and in the lives of people around you, it doesn't make God any bigger. It just helps you see Him more clearly. It focuses your view on Him and cuts out things around that don't matter. And your song has an impact. You see, all divine graces to individuals are intended also for influence. Your story becomes of deliverance, draws others to trust in Him. So how can God be magnified in your new season? Well, as we come to wrapping up this point today, first thing we need to do is eliminate negativity in our lives. We need to be able to, if we're magnifying God, it helps us eliminate negativity. If we're always negative and the people around us see that we're always negative, they're going to think, why do I want to be a Christian if they're always so unhappy all the time? See, whatever is true, whatever is noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, think about such things. That's Philippians 4:8. We can't enter a new season with an old attitude. We also need to pour into someone's life. Billy Graham himself said, all around you are people whose lives are filled with troubles and sorrows. In your new season, don't hoard blessings. Share them. We also need to be praying for something new. Graham also said that prayer is not a script. It's a cry. When you pray, pray. Ask God to renew your spirit, your dreams, and your love for Him. Find newness in your relationship with God. See, every chance is a day to rediscover grace. A new season is not just about new circumstances, it's about a new you. See, the goal in the new is to show God's different view. To show God in this different view. Your waiting, your pit, your praise, it's all so that others can see God through you. If you're ready for your new season, it begins by surrendering to Jesus. Whatever you're holding on to. And you might be saying, well, I'm already a Christian, Pastor Ben. And yes, that's true, you might be, but oftentimes we search our hearts and we find things that we're still holding on to that we haven't released to God yet. And if you find yourself in a pit, whether you're in one now or you fall into one tomorrow morning or whatever, know that God is right there in that pit with you. He never leaves you. He never forsakes you. See, when Job went through everything he went through, Job started out as a man who had everything, seemingly. And then he received words that, he had lost several possessions. He had lost his family. And still, he stayed faithful. And then he lost his health. Yet he still stayed faithful. He had some questions for God, sure. But he never turned his back on him. Even his friends said, "You must be doing something wrong." He says, "No, I am not." And his own wife said, "You know what? You are in such bad shape. Why don't you just curse God and die and be over with it?" And he refused to do that. That was another thing we were talking about on Thursday night with the worship team, is the story of Job and all of the different things he went through. And I think to myself, would I be that strong if I was put through that? I had to ask myself that question. He was in probably one of the deepest pits I've ever read about. And when God lifted him out of that pit, he gave him everything he had before and even more. He was blessed. Know that God is going to use those pits in your life to do something amazing. He is not going to leave you in there. He's going to lift you out of there. Sometimes we get a little comfy in our pits, though. We have to be ready for that time when God says, "It's time. You don't need to stay in here anymore." Let us pray. Father, thank you for your message today. And Lord, if any of us find ourselves in a pit right now, whether it's our own doing or whether it's just something that's happened to us, I pray that you would just help that person to feel your presence right now in that pit, right next to them. Maybe they've known intellectually that they're there, you're there, but they just haven't felt you nearby. They haven't really felt you. And Lord, I pray right at this very moment that they would sense you in a new way, whether they're here in person or whether they are listening online. Lord, give them that assurance, give them that peace, give them that comfort. Just wrap them in your presence, even right now. They are not alone. And Father, I pray that help them to know that you are preparing something for them. And Lord, maybe it's time. Maybe they have been dwelling in that pit a little too long. Maybe they've grown comfortable in their pits. Help them to take your hands and be lifted up. Because maybe it's time. Father, thank you for your presence. Thank you for the peace that comes with your presence and the knowledge that you are always with us. Help us to hold on to that, even in those darkest days. Help us to just run to you in those times of sorrows. And when we come out of that pit, may we magnify you so that the world around us can see you better with a song in our hearts. It is in your name we pray. Amen. All right, as we go from this place, I want to give you guys a little homework this week. And you're like, homework? Come on, I'm not in school. But you know what? We never really stop being in school until we get to heaven. But then I think we're in a whole different kind of school even in heaven. But I want you guys to take some time this week to write your own psalm. It doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't have to be eloquent. Not all the songs started out positive. In fact, David often starts out Psalms by listing all of the bad things that are going on in his life. You don't even have to share it with anybody ever. Make it something between you and God. Write your own psalm, write your own feelings, and share it with God. Have a great week. Be blessed and be a blessing.